Greg has very kindly offered to step in. So we're going to do this a bit on the fly. I have a few slides, but the way we'd really like to structure it is to have you ask questions about what it means and the how, when, and where of moving into leadership and how you communicate up. So we'd love you to think now of the questions that you'll work. So for those of you who were not in the research, teaching, and service panel, I thought I'd again provide a little bit of context. I've grayed out the part of my life that isn't so important for this particular panel.
Boy, that first thing's really important.
Cornell! Yay! Actually, the unsaid thing here, and this is important, is my parents were both professors at Cornell. My father was an applied mathematician in the engineering school, in a department that no longer exists in the engineering school at Cornell.
Sorry.
And my mother was a plant scientist, so she was a biologist. And this sort of, genetics at work sort of plays into my whole history. So the leadership positions that I've held have all been at the University of Pennsylvania. This may not be the case for everybody. Sometimes you have to move for those positions, like Greg has over the years. Probably the most instrumental thing was co-founding the Center for Bioinformatics, and I'll talk a little bit about that. Then Deputy Dean, Advancing Women in Engineering Program, Department Chair, and now moving out into the world. But interestingly, when I look back over that, the central point in my entire leadership career came out of founding the Center for Bioinformatics, which grew out of research. Okay, so this was I was fascinated by, because of my mother, I think, integrating data, biological data held a lot of interest. So it was really research, but that became really important at the time because bioinformatics was a new field. Having founded that center really raised my visibility in the eyes of my dean, which is why he asked me to be the deputy dean, and I was the first woman in a school leadership position. So that was it was pretty significant to have done the Center for Bioinformatics. And then I was asked by him to be the department chair. So that one point in my life had a huge influence later on. Because of my position as the deputy dean, I felt that I had to do something for women in engineering. So that actually came as a result of being deputy dean. And I think being on the Computing Research Association really grew out of the leadership positions that I had throughout my life. So, and then at the end, I'm now the director of the Masters of Data Science program, and you might not think that's a step forward, and I'm not sure if it is or isn't, but everybody else stepped back, and so I was there. So I'm enjoying it, and that's all that really, really matters. But I think that there are some people, and you may be one of those people, who know that they want to be in leadership. Some people have a passion for that when they start out their careers, but I actually was not one, and there's some who definitely don't want to, and I sort of fell in the middle. And again, this was because of my background. My father was an academic. He hated administration. He absolutely hated administration. My father-in-law was the dean of the business school at Cornell, and in particular, he made some decisions that my father really disapproved of. So my courtship with my husband consisted of ferrying books back and forth about how to run a university. So I really understood both sides of this pie, or whatever you want to call it, both sides before I got my PhD. My father then died when I was an assistant professor. And so when I went into school leadership, first of all, as founding the Center for Bioinformatics, I knew he would have approved of because it was really research, right? But this whole deputy dean and department chair, I went in when I was asked, and I had this guilt that my father really wouldn't approve of it. So despite the guilt, I took it on, and I actually enjoyed it, and I loved that. But, the research does tend to take a hit when you jump in to do these things. But getting back to the Center for Bioinformatics, I think that this was is sort of significant because it started out as us doing research and having fun together, and then a bunch of us, 4 of us primarily, got together and said, well, all of the schools, medicine, arts and sciences, and engineering are really interested in doing something here. We should probably start a center. And at that point, there was a senior person in computer science who probably would have been more appropriate for the position. He had more experience. He was good at this type of thing. But I felt it was important for my career. And so I actually asserted myself, which is not who I am. But I said, gee, wouldn't it be nice if I did that? And he, to his credit, he stepped back so that I could step up and take leadership. And so that was a surprise to me because it was not something I was aware that I wanted to do, probably because of my father's difficulties with leadership. So I think the thing for you to ask yourselves, or one question that you might have is, are you interested in leadership? You may feel it strongly now, and you may be uncertain. And so I'd say let it evolve. Service is always good, so you can always do service, but not necessarily leadership. But the how, when, and where is a little more difficult. When I started the Center for Bioinformatics, it really dovetailed with what I was focusing on at that point in my career, which was research and teaching. And so it was about research and creating new teaching opportunities or programs. But rank really mattered. So I was an associate professor when I started this, and especially in the medical school, rank matters. So it was actually a very good forcing function for the school to promote me to full professor because if they wanted a strong voice in that center, which was 3 schools, then they had to promote me. So rank matters for some leadership positions, and so it's important to know that as you go into these things. I will say that leadership is really, really rewarding, but it takes an awful lot of time. And so you really need to dovetail it with what you're passionate about. Again, research and programs was what I was passionate about at that time. And so I know that this is an audience of early career people, so why are we talking about leadership? Well, because you're thinking forward in your futures. There's a lot of different types of leadership, and leadership to you now may mean serving on those program committees, eventually stepping up and being a group leader or taking some position in your professional society that would give you visibility in your research field. So there's a lot of different sort of steps or leadership positions you can do that don't involve you whole hog going into some of the more managerial things. So that's all I wanted to say, and I think, Greg, did you want to?
Maybe I'll add color.
You'll add color? Should I
Yeah.
step down?
So, yeah, I think Susan and I were both kind of wondering, especially me because I didn't know I was going to be on this panel, why leadership. So I think we're going to rely on you folks to ask questions that, that tell us why you're here. But I'll just say a couple of words about when I stepped up to the associate dean position at Harvard. What really happened was the current associate dean, Mike Smith, got promoted to the dean of Harvard College. And so there was a hole. And the dean of engineering came to me and said, do you want to be the associate dean? And I said no. For exactly what Sue said, that somehow there's a perception that administration is a dirty word and that only people who are burned out and really don't have anything to contribute, do that kind of stuff. It's sort of like, maybe the worst thing in the world that you can do. So I said no immediately, but he turned around to me and pulled the dirtiest trick ever. There was a guy in the double E department that I hated and thought, because I thought he was really destructive. He picked on junior faculty, he wasn't good to students and so forth, and he wanted the position. And he told me, okay, if you don't do it, this other guy's gonna do it. So I did it. And I think you'll find yourself in that kind of role where you are backed into these positions, and it could be something, maybe not associate dean, it could be something like director of undergraduate studies or director of graduate studies. And I think it's important to identify those things that you feel passionately about. And for me, I was watching junior faculty come in the door and being treated poorly. In contrast, when I was at Cornell, I was treated really well, and thought that kind of mentorship and putting people up for awards, all these sort of things that were encouraging, was really important. And so that's why I thought I would take the hit on my research career. But it actually wasn't as big a hit as I thought it was going to be. For one thing, all of a sudden, I became someone who had to champion more than just programming languages and compilers, right? I had to look across a broader spectrum of the field. Another aspect was, I don't know about you, but I thought as a professor, you got to hang out with people from all over campus. You'd find out what the English people cared about. You'd find out what the physicists were doing. You're stuck in your building working on research with people working on computer science. But once you move into these leadership positions, you're connected to people across the university, and you start to see things outside of your department. And I found that really useful, really gratifying. For instance, best practices that were going on in other departments, you could bring them back to yours. So in that sense, it was a very gratifying thing and fulfilling, as Sue was suggesting. The thing that may be useful is to think about how you want to manage up too. This was when we were thinking about leadership. How do you talk to chairs and deans and provosts and so forth? And the easy thing to do is to try to put yourself in their shoes and figure out what are their constraints, how are they thinking about things, and that's the easiest way to predict how they're going to react. So I'm going to stop there, and then Sue and I can open it up to questions. But I think maybe managing up could be one of the topics that we could maybe dig into more.
Yep.
Great. I'll come sit down.
So we're going to throw it over to you. What do you care about here in terms of...
Why did you guys come
Yeah, there you go.
to a session on leadership? Yeah.
Hello. Right, so I'm Lev Raisin from the University of Illinois in Chicago. So I got tenure a year ago.
Yay!
Congratulations.
And found myself, immediately being given, more responsibility, including chairing like a faculty search committee, which is usually not done till later. And in general, I feel like I've been given more service and more quote-unquote leadership opportunities compared to other people of my rank because I do a pretty competent job and I care about it. And I find myself, I don't really have a strong opinion on leadership. I want to spend time on research. But I find if I keep going the way I've been going, I'll be, director of some undergraduate or graduate studies pretty soon and, other things at some point. And I seem to have been doing this ad hoc. Just people ask me to do things, and I generally say yes because I want a good job done. But that doesn't seem the right way to go about it. Just say yes to stuff because you want to see a good job done. And so I don't know if you have any advice for just, having a long-term plan about it, mainly because I want to continue focusing on research. I don't know, do you just declare I'm not doing any of this until 2025? I don't know. So do you have any thoughts on this sort of thing?
So I think it's important to say yes, and I think Greg talked about this too, to the right things. And the right things are the one where you have a vision. So I don't like to say yes to something where I don't see that I'm going to make an impact. Right. So I think that to me has been the guiding force is you can be asked to do something. Most of us, because I don't know, I have a heart of service, sounds like you do as well. You're very tempted to say yes immediately, but it's always good to sleep on it and then decide either do you hate the person who's going to do it if you don't? That's actually why I became chair. I didn't hate him.
That's why 90% of chairs.
I didn't hate him. It's just I would have gone nuts going to the faculty meetings the way he would have run them. Or it has to be something where you see a clear vision of how you're going to do the impact. So, I don't know.
I think another point is everybody I have talked to thinks that they have been asked earlier in their career than they should have been asked to step into these roles. And part of that is there are very few faculty who will step into these roles. And part of it's back to this dirty word, administration kind of thing. But some people are just selfish, and some people are givers. And what you find is a department is made up of both. And unfortunately, the people who do give get called on reflexively. It's the easy thing for a chair to do. Oh, you did a great job with this. This other person over here isn't so good. They really messed it up. They didn't have attention, so I'm going to go back to you. So the wrong strategy is to do a bad job, right? But I think it's part of the reality. The payoffs are good, but it's important, especially early in your career, to have the backbone to say no to the things that, as I think, the vision is a great way of sort of deciding whether you're appropriate for that. For example, chairing the hiring committee is a big point of influence, right? And so you may have a real vision for where the department ought to be going with its hires, and that would be a great way to do it. Or you may be worried about the undergraduate curriculum, and so that may be something you'd be focused on. So in these situations, I think it's better to proactively go to the chair and say, I want to do X. Then when they say, well, we want you to do Y as well, you can say, I already volunteered to do X.
Yeah.
So if you pick your poison, I think you're much better off than having it pick you. And short of that, I hate to say it, but you're going to get called on a lot because you're a good guy.
Practice saying no in front of the mirror.
Yeah. Great question, though. Thanks.
I want to ask you a question about center. So, what is the benefit of funding and directing a center? I mean, there could be, of course, that's maybe a leadership personally for you. There is some benefit for the university, maybe for the members of that. Of course, there might be big fundings for that, but personally for you. And I've seen in some schools they don't value that a lot because they see as some sort of directing FNAs to some other things. So I've seen some colleges that don't like it because they see that that's a drain to the FNA they receive. So what do you think about this overall?
So again, I think it's all
maybe based on your experience.
Yeah, context. At Penn, it was the deans tend to like centers. And this one was an interdisciplinary center. So it was 3 schools that were involved. The leadership came from medical, arts and sciences, and engineering. So what was the benefit to me? I guess it was the guy from the med school's idea to start it, so I probably didn't come up with the idea. But for us, it was a great way of getting funding. If you can say we have a center for bioinformatics, it's a great way of going broader than your department and meeting people and brainstorming new research ideas. So it was really, the research was really being driven in this. That was
so
the
university initiated? Or
no, we initiated and sold it up. So we.
Then you went after it.
Well, yeah. So we had a certain amount of funding anyway, NSF and DOE and NIH, and. But at the same time, the school was aware that this, the Human Genome Project was a big thing at the time. So the minute you would say something about that, they started salivating, and especially the medical school. So it was a bottom-up center. I'm not a big believer in top-down centers, so Greg may disapprove of this, but if a dean says, I want you to start a center at X, and
That's
it's
a
not
disaster.
something you care about, forget it. I'm not going to do it. So this was a bottom-up center that had a lot of buy-in from the top. And this is, I think Greg at the end was saying, sort of managing up. It's really important to know what are the goals of your dean and what is the goals of your president. Because if you want something to happen, you need to align what it is that you want with those goals. I mean, deans have to get their agendas done. If he says X is important and you say, well, I want to do Y, he'll say, okay, fine. But if you can somehow show how Y is X, then you're more likely to get the support, and that could involve financial support as well, because they could fundraise for it or something. So, yeah.
Yeah, so let me, there's a center that I just got off the ground with the College of Agriculture around computational digital agriculture, if you will. And that was a little top down, because I like cows, but it was really, as Sue said, bottom up, that we had to have some faculty that really would do the hard work. Centers can be good and they can be bad. They're great when they're a funding vehicle that provides an umbrella for a big group of people to come together, usually cutting across disciplinary boundaries, and which is, where increasingly most of the research is. So the bad thing about them is when they become permanent, like departments. So Harvard was sort of sprinkled with lots of centers, and you just couldn't kill them. You never garbage collected the centers, and so they do take staff to run and other resources, and so they are bleeding off resources from the university when they can't bring in the big funding. And so I think maybe that's what you were hearing, is that the administration is frustrated that it can't kill a center that isn't profitable. In the short run, when you're booting it up, there's usually some costs that deans are willing to fund if they're excited about the vision and the project, but they expect it going forward to pay its own bills. And as soon as it stops doing that, then of course the center director talks to the dean or the provost and says, hey, give me money for this, and that's when people fall out of love. Yeah, and Sue's idea about thinking about what your dean or your president or your provost is prioritizing is important, because you can align your goals with them and really get a leg up. But also, they often don't have the ideas. Okay, as a dean, I could say this, right? I don't have the ideas. I need to go to the faculty and here is the really cool new thing that's coming along that we need to invest in. And I'll hear about things. Quantum is a great example. Should we have a big center in quantum? And it's the kind of thing that I don't know enough about. I have to go consult heavily with a bunch of other faculty to find out whether this is something we should invest in. You can proactively take that stuff to deans. The one word of warning is that we have the attention of a squirrel on caffeine or something. So one page email will get read. A 10-page white paper, maybe. 50-page, no. Yeah. So.
Bullet points.
Yeah. A slide. Yeah.
Hi, Cindy Bethel from Mississippi State. Considering going into administration, I'm at associate going up for full this year. And so how do you decide academic administration versus research administration? And how do you decide, I have a very active research program currently, so do I wait until I wind it down? Or how do you make that transition from a really active program to something when you want to make that change? I still have students that I'm going through the process with and that kind of thing. And so how do you go through that kind of a transition?
First of all, I don't think it has to be an either or, depending on the leadership position you're talking about. As department chair, you have to keep a research program going, because when you step down as chair, what are you going to do? So it's not easy. You rely on help from your friends and colleagues, but if you have some good students, they'll keep you focused and keep driving the research forward. So it doesn't have to be an either or, even as dean.
Yeah, I'm trying to keep things going, and my provost keeps things going. And one way we do that is by carving out explicitly a day of the week and saying research only. You know, I will not have a meeting that has to do with administration on that date. Now, inevitably one happens, but not the whole day. And so I think you have to be more disciplined about making the time for research as part of your daily schedule. But it is possible. You do have to scale it back. I mean, depending on the position. So like I said, I get 1 day a week on research and 4 days on administrative crap.
Well, you both have gone through both administrative research, or research administration and academic administration. Is there a way that you finally decided what the preference would be?
For me, the fulfilling thing, just like it's really a thrill to watch students succeed, it's also a thrill for me to watch young faculty succeed. So really heading down that academic route was where I felt more of a connection. But that was also just luck again. You know, something fell into my lap, a position that was a good fit for me.
Yep. So I think I also echo I love to see students succeed. And the thing I liked about being department chair was I loved enabling my faculty to be successful. I loved talking about them and saying the great things that they'd done. That was wonderful. The really bad thing about being department chair is seeing the other side of your colleagues.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's why he likes being dean, because he actually doesn't have to see that
No, that's not true.
as much.
I see the really, really bad.
He sees the really, really bad, but not the everyday bad.
Right.
So that, that to me is why I limited the time that I was department chair. 5 years was plenty.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Hi, Matt Bates, University of California at Irvine. We've talked a lot about institutional leadership. Can you say a little bit about getting into field level leadership or positions, either with even like groups like CCC, or how to think about when do you chair the conference, when do you do those other things that are more field level rather than institutional administration?
Yeah, that's another great form of leadership, which is really, really needed. So, I think that as an assistant professor, you should probably be focusing most of your energy on getting the research and teaching done. And so being on a program committee or something like that is a great thing. Lots of program committees is a great thing to do, serving on panels, that type of thing. Moving into like a treasurer or vice chair, chair of your professional conference is a good next step. That gives you a certain amount of visibility within your community, and it allows you to influence how that conference is going forward. So I think that those are also really great things to do. Becoming member of CCC, I think, is also associate professor. You've got a great vision, great energy there. CRA is probably that, maybe a little older, but definitely something you shouldn't be considering as assistant professors, but associate moving up.
So I think something Shwedick was saying the other thing is really good too. The way that we lead in research is changing, or at least the way we communicate. So I have a colleague who started a really good blog and sort of regularly has guest blog posts from the field and so forth. Another colleague a junior colleague who did a podcast where he would sit down with senior people and interview them and so forth. These are great ways to sort of lead, in a sense, in the community, that if you're not sure how you can get plugged in, they give you a lot of visibility and may help you then make those other transitions or steps. And I would echo the idea that nobody wants to be treasurer or local arrangements chair for a conference or whatever, because it's a lot of work. But it's people who are successful in those positions are often looked at later on for the program chair positions or the general chair positions. And so volunteering for that for example, in the PL community, and David knows this, the communications for different conferences is often something that's done by a junior faculty member. We try to make sure that there's somebody good in that world to do that, because it's part of the pipeline up towards the bigger leadership roles.
You were saying something.
I don't know, I just followed up on your question that is the other side of the faculty. So
Oh, yeah.
what do you specifically mean? I mean, the problems or?
I think, so I touched on this at the end when I was talking about research, teaching, and service. There's a lot of things that aren't perfect in a university. AV equipment doesn't always work. You don't always have the office that you like. The heating doesn't work. All of these things. And there's some people who somehow go with the flow a bit better. And, maybe they'll be the one that gets in touch with the EOS, the operations services people, or they'll try to figure out the solution. And then there's other people who send email to the chair and carbon the dean and sometimes the provost. These types of people take enormous amounts of psychological time to deal with. There's also, some people are better at managing interpersonal conflicts with other faculty members. Faculty are like somebody said entrepreneurs. I think of them as cats. They don't like herd, they don't have a herd behavior in general. And so sometimes navigating those interpersonal conflicts becomes the chair's issue. And we aren't trained to do that, actually. We don't have the psychological tools to know how to, figure out what's the best way of managing this.
Good question. Others? So what are you guys considering? Some of you, what are the kind of roles that you're considering stepping into?
Me?
Yes.
Oh. Well, I've talked to the Vice President of Research about the possibility of a center. We've talked about the possibility of me going into their office, the Office of Research and Economic Development. Also considered a department chair position. So I'm kind of torn between, because I have both things I really like doing, and I'm concerned about students versus being concerned about research, growing research and helping people with that. So it's really kind of hard to see. And then I've been involved for years with attending CRAW things. I would love to be involved in CRAW. There never seems to be a way to figure out how to do that, though. And so trying to figure these things out it seems hard from the outside. The people who are doing it have figured that out, but we don't really know how you got there or how you did those things to become the chair of CRA or CCC or any of these different organizations. So kind of trying to figure out the lay of the land. But that's kind of where I'm really struggling with, what direction do you go?
I think a lot of things are a little random, so it's hard for us to say this is exactly how to do it. So for example, how did I get involved in CRA? And then I was involved in CCC as well for some time. Well, because when I was department chair, I really wanted my department to become more visible. And so I actually wanted to have somebody from my department on CRA. And so because I didn't want to take the time to do it, I nominated somebody else from my department who I thought would be more visible. And they didn't make it in the election. But the elections committee then turned around and said, but Susan, you should have done this. And so I went forward and had my name go up, and it wasn't because I thought that was what I wanted to do at the time, but I sort of did it eventually, and I love it. So I'm totally happy that was the decision I made, but it wasn't something I thought that I wanted to do initially, and it wasn't something I went after. So I think for me, a lot of things have been very random, and you just sort of look at the positions and say, what do I think I could do with it? And what am I going to have to give up? And how much does that bother me? So it's not easy. Decisions it's never clear what the right answer is. And there are probably a lot of right answers.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Getting ready to move into something? Or worried? So you said you've been asked. No? Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess most of the people in this room are tenure track professors. So I'm currently in the teaching track. I'm David Fossati from Emory University.
Wonderful.
So what do you suggest for people in the teaching track on how can we get involved in administration?
That's a wonderful question. Teaching track faculty are super important in all of our organizations now. In fact, CRA just put out a white paper on teaching track faculty. I don't know if you were involved at all in giving input into that. But just speaking about how we need as organizations to understand and promote better our really important teaching faculty. So with the teaching faculty at Penn, these people are heavily involved in ACM 6E, right? So you're probably a huge 6E member, which gives you leadership and visibility within that community. But within the department, many of them are taking leadership of programs. So, for instance, Chris Murphy, for some time, was director of the Master of Computer and Information Technology program. That's now being taken over by another teaching track faculty. A teaching track faculty has taken over another master's program. So a lot of the leadership is now going there. And then with the MCIT program that I referred to earlier, the dean really wanted this to become an online initiative. And so Chris has now become sort of the co-director of moving that online. So I think that there is definitely increased leadership opportunities for teaching faculty. And I've had the pleasure of working with Chris over the past couple weeks and putting together a teaser course for this. And I have learned a lot by working with him. So I think as a teaching faculty, you not only have a lot of influence over managing and directing programs, creating content and different ways of teaching courses. And you can, I see, at least at Penn, and I'm sure this is happening elsewhere, increased opportunities to work with the tenure track faculty in changing the teaching mission of the department and school.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, is that we're at a time where the way we teach just has to change dramatically. And both because of the scaling issues that computer science is facing right now, and because there really is good evidence that other strategies, like the more active strategies, are much better for everybody. So, and yet, tenure track faculty don't have the time or wherewithal to learn. So what I'm finding is the teaching faculty are the ones who are leading on the teaching innovation front. And even better is when we end up pairing two together where, there has to be the right respect between both sides, but having the right pairing really helps elevate the teaching of all the faculty by having all these innovations both experimented with in the classroom and pushing them forward and communicating best practices. I mean, simplest example in the world is GradeScope. So GradeScope was something that a few years ago one of our teaching track faculty tried out, pioneered, figured out the workflow, which it turns out the workflow was not so easy. GradeScope is a tool for sort of automatically grouping together different homework or tests so that it simplifies the grading. And in fact, and then documented and assessed how well that went, and then brought it to a faculty meeting, and everybody goes, oh, okay, I'm doing that now. So simple things like that, I'm finding the teaching faculty are the real innovators in the classroom. And so that's a tremendous way where you can lead. And I think moving up, there are other roles around the university. So we were talking about vice provost for research, but there are all kinds of roles in, for example, the undergraduate education and advising offices, the career services, all kinds of things like that, where input and connection with people who actually talk to students as opposed to outsiders is really important. Anyway.
And if that's the question,
All right.
lunch is ready. If you're outside, so
Yeah.